Hey y'all, I'm Cece, and today I am here to talk about the top 10 books that I would like to read in 2021. Oh, this is such a classic video on my channel, and I think it's classic not only for the fact that I have done this video every year since I started making videos on the internet, and I don't know if I've ever successfully completed one of these lists. But it's not for lack of trying. I try so hard every year. So, we're here once again. I have a new top 10 of books that I would like to read within the next few months. I do have a theme in mind. These are the books right here that I'm going to talk about. I have picked 10 books by authors I have already enjoyed books from in the past. Basically, what I have noticed as I go through my stats at the end of every year reading-wise, I love discovering new authors. I don't tend to focus on reading backlist books. It's just because I get swept up in new releases. So for these 10 books, I have given a book by this author at least 4 stars in the past. I will talk about all of that, but before we get into all of the titles specifically, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of classes for lifelong learners. There are classes in illustration, photography, video, design, freelancing, and a ton more. It's an absolutely incredible platform where you can learn what you want to learn and grow at your own pace. Today I wanted to shout out a Skillshare class called Digital Illustration for All by Lacey Jordan. Something I've been focusing on recently with hobbies, with exploring my creativity. I've been trying to focus less on perfection and more on exploring my personal style and my personal ideas, which is really, really difficult for me, but it is something I'm trying to do. I love how much this class encouraged me to create from my own perspective. It's a helpful boost. It's a helpful boost for all of my hobbies, but in particular this hobby that I've been pursuing lately with digital art. I've just been working on it little bits every day, and it's been fun to push myself and kind of explore a different kind of creativity for me. Premium membership to Skillshare will get you unlimited access to all of the classes on their site, and that premium membership works out to be less than $10 a month. And the first 1,000 people who click the link in my description are going to get a free trial of that premium membership to explore your creativity. Definitely check it out. Link will be down in the description. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Okay, now we can get into this top 10 list. I have 10 titles to talk about. Good lord, that was a lot of teas. These aren't in any particular order, it's just that I have read a book previously by every single one of these authors and absolutely loved reading it, so we're gonna start here at the top. You can already see the book, so I'm just gonna pick it up so I can talk about Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smith. Don't Call Us Dead is a poetry collection that I have been just so eager to read. I bought it last June and then I didn't get around to it a lot. You know, that happened to a lot of us, and it happened to a lot of these books. This collection is on my list because I previously read and loved Homie by Danez. This was on my favorite books of the year for 2020. Much like Homie, I believe Don't Call Us Dead deals with topics of racism, homophobia, ableism, as well as people that specifically Danez has lost. Homie made me cry. I read a ton of poetry in 2020, and I've just heard incredible things about Don't Call Us Dead. So considering the fact that Homie was a 5-star read, this had to be on my list for 2021. Coming in at number 9, I want to talk about Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. I previously read a book by Sylvia last year. I read her book, Mexican Gothic. This was a gothic horror novel set in Mexico in the 50s. It was creepy, it was well written, I really enjoyed it. Gods of Jade and Shadow is on a slightly different track. It is still a historical book that has, fantastical elements. This is a historical fantasy. This is set in the Jazz Age in Mexico, and it's deeply inspired by Mayan mythology, and specifically the main character accidentally frees the Mayan god of death. I really liked Mexican Gothic, and one of my favorite things about Sylvia Moreno-Garcia and her work is that there are so many different styles and genres to explore. So I read a gothic horror novel first, This is a historical fantasy. I also really would love to read like Certain Dark Things, which is also fantasy. I believe it has like vampire origins, and I don't know, I just feel like they're so varied. There are so many different types of stories to explore, which is why I've been so eager to jump back into Sylvia's work in particular. So really hopeful that I can get to this one sometime in the next few months. I do have a couple of sequels in this stack because part of reading more in 2021 by authors I've loved in the past includes actually wrapping up some series. I make this goal like every year on my channel that I would really love to read and complete more series that I've started. So here we are again. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Speaker by Traci Chee. This is the second book in the Reader trilogy, the first book being The Reader. I read this in 2018, 2019, I don't remember off the top of my head. It is a YA fantasy that I think is like the perfect intersection between like The Hunger Games and Graceling, that sort of feral girl YA fantasy era, but specifically from like a particular lens that like investigates female rage and, you know, that kind of stuff. Like, everything I loved about Graceling and The Hunger Games and what it did for Katza and what it did for Katniss, oh god, didn't even realize, I think really applies to Sophia, who is the main character in The Reader. This book is set in a world where the written word doesn't exist, essentially, and our main character, Sophia, one of her parents is dead, and then she goes home one day and she finds her other parent dead, and in her escape, she happens upon this object. She doesn't know what it is. It turns out to be a book. I loved reading this. It was unique. There are so many different storylines. There's a whole pirate storyline to this that I really liked, and I just haven't been able to get to the next book. So I've actually been in the middle of a reread of The Reader for a while, if you can tell where my bookmark is. Hey, there we go. So once I get through my reread of that, I can jump into the second book, The Speaker, and hopefully I'll be able to get to the third book, The Storyteller, which is right there. Cross your fingers for me. Next, I want to talk about A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. This is the sequel to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, which I read last year and absolutely loved. It was another 5-star read. It was one of my favorites. A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor takes place after the events of the first book, and I know very little about it. The first book is about a girl named April May who one night happens upon what looks like a statue in New York City. She films a video with it, posts it online, and then it turns out she is the first person to document the existence of what April has called the Carls. They pop up all over the world at the exact same time, and they're all identical, and so April kind of becomes the center of that story. And it's an absolutely brilliant book about community and knowledge and being kind of a nerd, and also closing yourself off, being a millennial who doesn't know what the fuck they're doing with life. It hit home in every way, so I can't wait to pick up the second book. Moving on, I wanna shift into talking about some horror. Yay. I wanted to bring up The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Now, this is the first author on this list where I have read more than one of his books in the past. The book that I gave the highest star rating to was Night of the Mannequins. This is a book that I read last year. It was also released in 2020, and it is a send-up to, like, slasher fiction with some very cool narrative tricks thrown in. I also read his novella Mapping the Interior a couple of years ago. That is also horror, but very much interior horror that's also investigating like grief and the loss of a father and how that impacts Native families, but particularly the oldest boy in the family, and it's a really interesting book. The Only Good Indians I have on my Kindle, and I'm very excited to read it. This has been at the top of my Stephen Graham Jones TBR from the beginning, and I'm so thrilled that I can, like, actually get to it now. I will say, as excited as I am to read this, I don't know, like, to a full extent what the book is about. I know it is about revenge, and I know it is about 4 friends who are tricked by an entity of some kind. All 4 of these men are Native American, I believe Blackfeet specifically. So this revenge story is based on something that happened in childhood, and it is also very much attacking these men based on, like, beliefs that they left behind. Like, that's part of the trial, like using these very specific things in a violent and vengeful way and what that means for them. Like I said, like, there's a lot here, but a lot I don't know, and I'm excited to read it regardless because I love horror, and I have been so fascinated by Stephen Graham Jones' other 2 books that I've read, and he has so many more I'm hoping I can get to. But I believe this was his 2020 release, or other 2020 release, and I'm hoping I like it at least as much as Night of the Mannequins, maybe even more. We'll see. I have another new release here. I want to talk about Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. I have been so anticipating this book. Yaa Gyasi also wrote Homegoing, which I read in 2018, I think, and absolutely adored. It was... I cried through reading this book. I loved this book. And so I've been, like, so looking forward to the release of Transcendent Kingdom. And then my mom got it for me for Christmas. So while Homegoing was, mostly a historical book, this one is set in the contemporary South. It follows a Ghanaian family who are immigrants, and we are following each of their lives as we're kind of exploring how their lives are defined by each other, by depression and addiction. Yaa Gyasi's writing is brilliant. I love Homegoing because it is a family saga, and I love the way that she writes families, how she writes different stories of immigration, and I think that that's obviously going to be central to this story, and I'm sure I'm going to love it just as much as I loved Homegoing. I'm prepared for it to destroy me in the best way. Okay, this next one, it's very high at the top of my list because I could really start to polish off my list for this author. I think I will have read all of her backlist. I might be wrong though. Anyway, we have With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, which I am dying to read. A shout out to 2 books that have appeared in my previous 2 years, like, favorites videos. Clap When You Land, which was on my faves list for 2020. It's a novel in verse about sisters and grief. Fabulous. And The Poet X, which was on my favorites of the year list in 2019. This is a YA novel in verse about a young girl who is starting to grow up. Her body is changing, and that's changing the way that she interacts with the world, and it's also very much about her mother's intense relationship with religion and her much less intense relationship with religion. Again, fabulous, 5 stars. With the Fire on High is YA, and it is about Emoni, who is a young mother. She's a teenage mother, and she, like, her biggest passion in life is cooking. Her life is defined by that, and it's defined by her young daughter and her abuela, and so she knows that she can't pursue cooking as a career. It's just not feasible, and yet that is, like, it is this special place where she understands it. She knows exactly how to work with food, and so I'm sure there's going to be so much more here. Every single time that I go into an Elizabeth Acevedo book, I do my absolute best to describe all of the things that it's going to deal with, and then inevitably, I read the book, it knocks me on my ass, it has about 11 billion more themes that are all perfectly executed, and they destroy me emotionally in the best possible way. So, I'll let you know how my journey goes with the Fire on High. Okay, the next book I'm going to do my very best to talk about, but I have been doing my best to talk about this while knowing that I think the way I talk about this book will change once I've read it, just because there's a bunch here that I don't fully understand from the summary. I'm talking about Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. This is literary adult fiction that is deeply inspired by the author's own life and experiences. It's about Ada, who has been causing her family deep concern as she begins to develop in her youth separate selves. And as she gets older, an event happens that crystallizes these selves into very distinct different identities. It's very reflective of Igbo tradition, and like I said, it's semi-autobiographical, and so I will have a lot more to say once I read this. I just realized I talked about this whole book without even telling you Akwaeke's other book that I have read. I also read their book, Pet. This is a YA book about a young girl who lives in a world where monsters no longer exist, and then one of her mother's paintings comes to life. It tells the main character that it is there because there is a monster in her city and it needs to hunt that monster. So this is about consequences and whether or not turning a blind eye to problems actually solves any problems. It is a fascinating book with a black trans girl main character, and it's one of the most unique books I've ever read. And I had originally intended to read Freshwater before I ever read Pet, but this was the order in which I acquired their books, so I am eager to read Akwaeke Emezi's book Freshwater, and I will try to talk about this more coherently once I've read it in full. Oh boy, we're getting to the very end of the list now. We've got this and one more. Okay, second to last book on this list, number 2 on the list, really, is Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. Oh, here. Can't even see Emily's name. What a tragedy! There we go. By Emily M. Danforth. This is a Gothic horror comedy set at, an all-girls boarding school, and it's got dark academia vibes as well. And it's super fucking gay. The Favorite meets The Haunting of Hill House is how this is described on the back, and I legitimately can't picture a better combination. So I'm very excited to read this. I have previously read Emily's other book, The Miseducation of Cameron Post, which most of you have probably heard of if you are a frequent viewer of this channel or if you are a reader of queer YA at all. This book was incredibly formative to me in that it was one of the first queer YA books I ever read. It was the first or second book I ever read with a queer girl as a protagonist, and so it is always going to have a very particular place in my heart for that, and I've been waiting to see what Emily M. Danforth would do next, and the answer is this chunky, adult, horror, comedy, sapphic, dark academia. I can't imagine a better series of decisions. This is gonna take me so long to read, so I'm going to need your encouragement frequently. Yell at me on various social media to read this book and all of these books, and I am going to get it done this year. I can't wait. I can't wait to read it. Okay, we've reached the end of this list. This is at the very top of the list of books that I would like to read in 2021. It is a sequel. Ooh, isn't that exciting? It's a sequel to a YA contemporary book. I don't read those very often. I'll drop the suspense now. It's Darius the Great Deserves Better by Adib Khorram. Yet another 2020 release I didn't get to in 2020. I've talked in the past about how meaningful Darius the Great Deserves Better is, or Darius the Great is Not Okay is, and how much it impacted my own personal journey as far as getting a diagnosis for depression and starting medication. It was hugely influential. This is a YA contemporary about a biracial kid who has depression. His name's Darius. He has been taking depression meds for a while, which is basically the only thing he believes he has in common with his white father. But he also feels extremely disconnected from his whole Persian family. And then he finds out that his grandfather is dying. And so his family takes a trip to Iran, and this is kind of about Darius exploring his relationship with his Persian family, exploring more of his relationship to depression, exploring all of these things through Star Trek. He's also fat, and that is part of his journey, and this is considered, I would say, a pre-coming out book That is how it was marketed, in that it's not fully brought up in this book, but Darius is queer, and that is the implication throughout. Darius the Great Deserves Better, I'm sure, is going to destroy me in 100 new ways, but this is the sequel to Darius the Great Is Not Okay, and let's just say I'm prepared to cry. I've gone through a lot since I read the first book in this series. I have, gotten a diagnosis, watched 3 separate Star Trek shows. I'd never watched any Star Trek, and now I've watched Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Oh, and I also watched the new Picard show, so 4, and I watched all the movies. Okay, I didn't watch the OG movies. But, Darius understands so much of his relationship to his dad and his depression through Star Trek. And so, in the previous 2 years, getting diagnosed, me starting medication, going on personal journeys, watching a shit ton of Star Trek, I've just continued to connect to this story, and I'm ready. I'm ready to go back to Darius and find out more about him. Because I love him. Okay, all, that is it. Those are the top 10 books that I have on my personal TBR for 2021. My goal of 2021. Let's look at the authors we love. I love these authors. I love all of their words. And I'm so constantly focused on the next thing, and I love that. I love finding the next thing because it provides me so many opportunities to recommend and discuss. But I constantly forget to go back to books and to go back to authors who I know I'm going to love, who I know have created stories in the past that I love. So there you go. There's my focus for 2021. Hopefully this is a year of discovering a ton of new favorite books, because I want to get back to being really excited about reading. Hopefully these books are going to give me the chance to do that. Thank you again so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Please, like I said, check out the link in my description. Thank you all so much for watching. If you consider leaving a comment, perhaps leave a sunshine emoji there. I have been asking that recently because yellow is my favorite color. I'm usually wearing it, and it just brings me a lot of joy. It's one of those things that summons happiness, and we're moving into spring, so leave me a sunshine emoji. It would mean the world to me. I love scrolling through my sunny comments. Other than that, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!